Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's your favorite paranormal investigator here, Tim Sedano. Welcome to segment 2 here on the UPRN. Tonight, we're going to talk about paranormal M theory. This is something I kind of came up with. So no one go out there ripping me off. That's mine. Paranormal M theory is similar to M theory, and this gets discussed in the show a little bit. But to give it a finer point of definition so you know what we're talking about going in, M theory itself grabs string theory, quantum mechanics, and a few other pieces of mathematical theory and combines it. It's supposed to be, and it's incomplete at this point mathematically, it's supposed to be the unifying theory of everything. And that's a big deal. Applying that to the paranormal world, based on my discussion in segment 1 with Sammer, we started noticing a lot of points of connectivity across not only history, but cultures across the globe. We kind of landed on the Ifrit, what they look like, and how they kind of resemble the Pukwudgie, and how they kind of resemble these other creatures in South Pacific lore, or even Asian Pacific lore. And there's just so many points, and that's just one subject. We talked about the different gods throughout the world, the ancient world, and in some cases, the current world, who have gods that are blue. Interesting point there. A lot of them. I mean, literally every continent on this earth of ours has at least one or two blue gods. That's strange. We can dive in a little bit deeper, talk about pyramids all over the world being built roughly at the same time frame. The construction's a little different, but the general, well, the general period of construction is roughly the same globally, from Egypt to South America and Central and even Mexico, Central America and Mexico, I should say, all the way over to, again, the Asian Pacific region. It's amazing. It truly is amazing. And they all seem to have been built roughly around the same time. Further, there are even older cultures, Göbekli Tepe, for example, and that's approximately 30,000 years old, but predates a lot of human history as far as the mainstream science is concerned. That already had that technology, and it was even better. I mean, moving massive monoliths, a lot of stuff in South America and Central America, as far as the ancient cities go, like Teotihuacan, that's in Mexico, and a few other things along those lines, were built on older sites. Wow. I mean, that's saying something. That's just an amazing thing. So that's kind of where paranormal M theory comes in. It has a little bit to do with ancient astronaut theory, a little bit to do with modern like Bigfoot research and UFO research and all that fun stuff. But so yeah, M theory for the paranormal. Are ghosts related to Bigfoot? We could probably find a connection there somewhere. UFOs related to ghosts. There have been reports of aliens behaving like spirits. In fact, I have a story about that, which I'll tell at the end. So, long and the short of it, we discuss and admittedly fan out off the topic of paranormal M theory in this episode. Tonight's episode, The guests are JJROSE777 and Erick Szilagy from uNcomfotable. And I want to thank them once again for being on the show. It was a fantastic discussion. But we have more to explore. And so let's get right into the episode. This is segment 2, The Paranormal M Theory. Enjoy. M theory is a theoretical framework in physics that attempts to unify all consistent versions of superstring theories. It was proposed by Edward Witten in 1995, building upon earlier work in string theory. M theory is a significant advancement in theoretical physics as it provides a potential theory of everything, or TOE, that reconciles quantum mechanics and general relativity. Welcome to Paranormal Insight. We will be discussing the so-called M theory of the paranormal. Tonight's guests are Erick Szilagy from uNcomfotable and JJROSE777 from the YouTube channel, JJROSE777. Lady, gentlemen, welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Hello, kind sir.
Was looking forward to this until I woke up this morning and realized that my basement was partially flooded, and really didn't think that things would work out for me to get to do this, but it was a very simple plug and play, and thankfully the local Lowe's had the sump pump that I needed, and there was no major changes in the way they did things, and everything was still pretty standard. So that was about a 10 minute fix. So
always good. Always good.
Yeah.
Is this gonna be on the Patreon?
No, I did not decide to film that whole thing and put it on the Patreon. So
okay, well, I appreciate you sharing it on my show. That's fantastic.
it was like of all the days,
right.
I got a 1 o'clock my time to do this, and it's like, as I sent JJ a message, I'm like, just giving you a heads up, these things don't usually go my way. So I'm ecstatic that it was as easy to get through this.
Me too. It's a pleasure having you on. JJ, welcome back.
Thank you.
So today's topic, actually, it sprung from last week's conversation with Samer. We started talking about monsters from the Middle East, from Islam, and from ancient Arabic times. And we started seeing some connections between various monsters throughout the world, and not only monsters, but mythological creatures. One of the chief things was, and I actually touched on this in the show, Eric, was the Ifrit are a type of jinn. And they're these little dudes. They're green. They have gigantic ears. And the first thing I thought of were the Hobsonville goblins.
Hobsonville goblins, yeah.
Right. And you did a brief, not brief. It was pretty well. It was a nice little radio show. It was like a little radio play. You put sound effects in there and everything. It was really good.
That's what I was going for. I was trying to get the old time radio show feel to it, but
you succeeded. That was pretty well done.
Thank you.
And that was episode 60, if I recall.
Yeah, okay. I don't remember.
200 episodes in, and
it's been a while. It's been a while ago.
Yeah,
it was a lot of fun doing that, though.
Yeah, it was. I'm sure it was intensive, though, compared
to there's a lot of post-production work when you're trying to pull in sound effects to elicit that feeling of being there, like you're kind of experiencing it.
I understand.
But it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed doing them. They're just very time consuming, and that's why I don't do a lot of them. I did that one, and I did the one on the Do We Like Monster as well. And yeah, if I had the time, I'd do more, but they eat up a lot of time.
Yeah, I understand completely. Yeah, I'm a as everyone knows by now, I do video editing as my one of my
Day
jobs.
job.
Quasi day job. Yeah, it's my real day job is with doing AV work at a dental society where we help with CE and stuff like that. And I have to do all the nighttime, all the after hours work on the AV and the IT side of things. But getting back to our topic, I thought about the Hodgskinville goblins. Again, I can't speak today. And then there was something else that popped into my head, which was the Puckwudgies. And
Yeah.
there's a minor difference there. The Puckwudgies are said to be a little bit furrier, but basically the same archetype. And then he says, "Oh, you know what? There's something like that in Southeast Asia. In fact, all of Asia, as far as the Orient goes, and stuff like that. And there's these little creatures in all the mythologies over there that have little guys about 3 or 4 foot tall, gigantic ears, and they're typically green or blue." So I thought that was an interesting point of connection, pretty much globally. And then we got into we talked a little more about jinn and how some of them were blue. And I know that sounds like it's straight out of Aladdin, but it's actually based on accounts from not only the Quran, which actually has a book, like the Book of Matthew, the Catholic Bible. It's a book of jinn, which I found fascinating. I didn't know that until that episode. But yeah, there are different colors apparently, and one of the jinn colors is blue. And I said, well, that's fascinating. There are blue creatures and gods across the world too. He says, you're right.
India was
My first go-to as well. Then he pointed out, well, Osiris is either blue or green. And then we go to Norse mythology. One of the elves that made Mjolnir for Thor.
Yeah.
He was colored blue, but his brother wasn't colored blue because he wore gloves. He was smart. But we hit upon all these, and it's not only those locations. Again, we go over to Southeast Asia, and we go to either mainland China and Japan and pretty much all the Orient. And we have a lot of blue creatures there too. And then we circle right back, right next door is India, pretty much. And so yeah, a lot of blue gods, a lot of blue people. In modern times, we had blue people, the Kentucky blue people. And that ended up being a little pinched vein or artery here.
Right. Yeah.
And there was a doctor who says, oh, I think I can fix that. And he does a minor surgery, and this brother and sister clears it right up. They were cyanotic, and they were okay with it. It didn't affect them really, except they were tired all the time. Yeah. But I mean, that's just strange. A minor little glitch in the human genome, and you get this blue tint to you. And so these different points of connection kept happening throughout the interview. And that's when he and I started hitting upon this M theory of all things having relation, not only the ancient world, but in the modern world as well. And I go back to you, Eric, when you were last on the air with me, you said something that kind of alluded to this. You mentioned how there were, in a haunted situation, often knocks. In a Bigfoot situation, there are knocks.
Yeah. And
it got me to thinking, it's like, maybe there's more to this than I'm even realizing in coming up with this theory. And I'm sure not the first one to think of it. But I don't know. Are there any other points? Because I have a couple on my notes here, but if you have anything that's come to mind, either of you, please express them now.
JJ, you go ahead. We've been monopolizing the conversation so far.
No worries. I love listening to you guys. This is basically something I've been talking about from the get, when I started my YouTube channel, which is, you can say you're from any different religions, spiritual backgrounds. At the top, they're all the same. Every single civilization all has lore about the little people or the elves or the fae or this, or they just call them different things, but they're all describing the same things. They're all describing these different people, whether they call them gods or deities or sky people or whatever they call them. But again, they're all describing the same things. And when you think about interdimensional beings and shadow people, we're able to sometimes get glimpses. Lately, I've been getting a lot more than glimpses. You're able, in a way, they can see us better than we can see them, right? So they know we exist. We used to know that they existed. That was in familiar culture. It was just a known fact. And then over time, especially in the last 200 years, I would say, is when people started closing their mind off to these things and ignoring or forgetting that they exist. And for me, I find that sad, but at the same time, now they're making a comeback because people are there's a resurgence of people seeing them and interacting with them. And, some people will call them aliens, some people will call them different spiritual creatures. The fact of the matter is, there's so many different encounters with these things that are physical in nature that you can't deny that these things exist on some plane.
You touched on a number of things that Sammer said. And he has the exact same point that you did, that various cultures see this thing in various ways. They'll interpret things differently, give them different names, as you said. You also matched exactly what he pointed out was said in the Quran, that in the jinn dimension, or the demon dimension, as it translates, which isn't necessarily one thing or another, but I mean, I'm just talking about translations here. The jinn dimension, they can see us, but we can't see them. So you match that too, which is blowing my mind right now. But
which,
go ahead.
I mean, it exists in all the major religious books. The further back you go, the more it's accepted. Within the Buddhist and the Indian culture, these things are way more accepted and not unusual as compared to when you get into the Bible. And you got to remember that with the Torah and the Bible, there's a whole part where it starts talking about don't do magic. And that's almost when people's eyes glaze over and they don't understand that that's actually saying magic was true. I mean, Moses had a straight magic off with other magicians in front of Pharaoh. That's all documented in the Bible. And then they started telling the Jewish people, don't practice magic. And when that really took a foothold, that started the forgetting process, I feel. But whether you call them angels, demons, whether you call them jinn, whether you call them fae folk, whatever you want to call that, the fact of the matter is there's so many stories going back throughout time, even to cave art drawings, that prove that these things exist and that there's been consistent interaction with them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're hitting the nail on the head there. There have been, I mean, globally, that's kind of what the M theory, so-called M theory. I'm sorry, I'm borrowing that from physics. That's that's a quantum theory.
Is fine.
Yeah.
I mean, when you also take into account the pyramids all over the world, how do you explain that?
Built roughly around the same time. I mean,
all over the world.
And
yet supposedly we were all hunter-gatherers living in caves. Then you go back further to things like Göbekli Tepe, where you have these massive monuments that were built 10, 20, 30,000 years ago, and they're covered with art. There's clearly beings that are coming through on one of them. It shows them actually walking through a pillar. It's up to interpretation, but you can see the hands wrap around and it's phasing through. So clearly there were cultures before ours and it's a little egotistical of us to think that we were the only ones. That's just my personal opinion. But if you even hearken back to Atlantis, or for some people lately have been calling it pre-flood civilizations, who knows what color those people were and what ended up happening.
Yeah, I mean, they could have all been blue. I mean, I'm sorry, that's a stupid joke. But
there's a song about that.
Well, you know, so I'm going to play the devil's advocate and say this from a standpoint of somebody who may be a listener. So far, the conversation has gone where it seems like we're talking about a small number of things that are all the same throughout the world, and various cultures and different times have experienced these things. And I want to interject that I think there is a number of different things that are going on all over the world. It's not just a couple of small things that are all being misinterpreted or gathered into one group and saying that that's what everybody's experiencing. I think there's a much wider field of view when it comes to this weirdness. Again, they're all being experienced throughout the world. And M theory, I mean, essentially it's the leading candidate for the theory of everything. It goes into string theory, and it goes into quantum mechanics and quantum realms, and exactly. it just, man, the longer that I'm in this, and the number of weird little one-offs that I hear about, I just can't help but think that, this is a much more vast grouping of weird things that are happening. It's not just a few things that are being recognized throughout the world, and we're just sticking them all together in a group and saying, well, just because they call them this, and just because they call them the Fae, and just because they say they're the Atlanteans or the blue avians, all the blue ones are, X, Y, and Z. I don't think that's the case. I think it's a much broader spectrum.
And I agree with you, Eric. I mean, when you're talking about a layered reality, which I've discussed, other people have as well, and interdimensional beings, there are beings that might look like us from a different dimension. They have different capabilities. Those could be the old gods, right? The ones who looked like humans. They just had different powers or greater abilities than we do. And then you have all these other things, the little people, you have the big feats, you've got the dogmans, you've got people who are seeing little green hands come out of nowhere, like the duende. You have all these things from all over the world. But when I'm listening to these stories, I'll listen to one, for instance, from South America, and the way that it's described is exactly how in 4 other cultures they would describe a goblin or an elf or part of the Fae family.
Right.
They're all describing the same things, again, just because cultures, we call them different names because we have different languages, right? So if you took this back all the way, 20, 40,000 years ago, perhaps when we were a global civilization with different technology, and people spoke or understood, there was like a language that everyone understood and can communicate in. Everyone just had a basic understanding that these things existed and what they were. And then when languages separated and broke off, we started calling them different things. But I'm 100% with you, Eric, that there's more than just blue people happening all over the world. There's a huge list of all of these things. And because our veil was tightened for so long spiritually, there was a time period when we were able to forget because these things weren't coming through. And, this isn't going to be the most popular thing that I'm about to say, but due to religion being so foisted on so many, it shut a lot of people's minds down because they had to either forget or forcefully forget the old ways. And, you know, a lot of those things didn't get written down. I was listening to something this morning that was talking about Norse mythology, and it was saying that the first thing about it didn't actually get written down until 1200.
Well,
In the
that's the case for a
1200s.
lot of religions. I mean, the Quran, it took 200 years to write that. The Christian Bible took 300 years to write that. And I think the same thing for the Torah. It's took a couple hundred years to get that written out. No one
Right,
was
because it
sitting
was
down
all
writing the things down as they were going.
exactly. And it was verbal and it was just culturally understood, just like we have certain things today that are just understood. You know, you go to a bank, you see a little owl, right? They always have those little, I don't know, in
Yes,
our area anyway, they have the owls up there to scare the pigeons so that they don't sit on top and poop all over the bank.
right.
But imagine if we have a world calamity and someone stumbles upon that 400 years in the future, they're going to think that this was a location that we went to worship owls. Because for whatever reason, everything goes into, oh, if there's something there, this is what they worship. If they went to Wall Street and they found that bronze bull, they're going to think, oh, this is a location where they all worship this bull. No, it's Wall
You,
Street. You know,
yeah,
it
right.
had a different
I see where you're going. Yeah.
interpretation for us. But if that interpretation is lost or forcefully forgotten because another culture or religion or whatever it is comes in and literally wipes it from the map, then we're kind of where we are now, where we're left with all these old stories that everyone thought, oh, these are stories. These were the old lore. And then we start seeing them happening today. And we're saying, maybe great grandma wasn't off her rocker when she would tell you, you know, don't go into the forest after dark or whatever it was. And these things, because again, the veil is coming down and we are a global civilization again, people are starting to put the pieces together and realize these aren't separate incidents. These are similar.
Yeah. To go back to Eric, yours and Eric's point, and including what you just said, there, I am not saying that only certain points connect. I'm saying that there is, globally speaking, not only in the ancient world, but in the modern world, there are just too many things that do connect, not to be related.
I think one of the things that we kind of lose, we lose is that throughout our existence, we have had multiple, we've had multiple layers of what would be considered technology. So our technology today versus what our technology was when they built these monolithic structures that we haven't been able to figure out how they did. And so on and so forth. As we start to discover these other cultures that existed thousands and thousands of years ago, we see that they had some kind of a technology, but it doesn't look like our technology today. Our technology today looks very much like the cell phone we carry in our pocket, or the podcast equipment we have sitting in front of us, or, you know, the 70-inch TV that we have hanging in our living room. I think it's all relative to the time that we are living in, and those books like the Bible and the Quran and you know the Torah and the Bhagavad Gita, is it Bhagavad Gita in India? Yeah,
What she said.
Yeah. Those things were written in a time, and the words that were used to write those scripts were what was understood at the time. So for us, in our knowledge today, for us to go back and read those things, those very often don't read very well. So we have to have people who are supposed experts in interpreting what was meant, or what was said in these, and translated and I don't know that we get it right all the time. I think there's a lot of I think there's a lot of science behind it, but I think there's a lot of presumptiveness that these experts are truly experts when all they have to go off of is what they've been able to discern from history themselves. So, you know, I don't think we get the full picture from our history, our past, especially when you're going back to those kind of cultures. And it leaves a lot up to assumption on our part today. Like the stuff that we're talking about to me is, Stephen King wrote a novel called The Mist, and it was turned into a pretty decent TV or a pretty decent theatrical release. It wasn't great, but it was pretty good. And but the theory behind that, I mean, I think when that veil is peeled back by whatever means it is, whether it's a spiritual thing that's happening, whether it's something that CERN has done, in The Mist, it was kind of alluded to the fact that there was something similar to CERN that ripped open the veil between the worlds. And we've got a CERN, right? We've got a CERN, and what is it doing? They're searching for the God particle. There's a lot of conspiracy theories. You got some kind of cloaked figures doing some kind of a ceremony out in front of it, and everybody says that the statue that was gifted to them is like the destroyer and everything. And I mean, I get that it's easy to draw a conspiracy theory on that, but when you look at those things, they're actually part of the culture of the part of the world that they're in. So it seems a little bit more natural when you look at it from that aspect. When you're looking at it from an American seeing it, it seems pretty damn weird. But what is their purpose? Their end goal at CERN is to have done what they needed to do by a specific date. And I think it's is it 2028?
Where you know more about the CERN agenda than I do.
And it's like, okay, if you have a steadfast end date, then you must have a better idea of what you're going after than what we've all heard. And I find it really interesting to find out that CERN is currently working on, and I'm reading this directly from an article, currently working on the Future Circular Collider, the FCC, which is intended to be a successor to the Large Hadron Collider. The Hadron Collider is 27 kilometers long. This new one, the FCC, the Future Circular Collider, is 91 kilometers. That is just under 3.5 times the size of the current Hadron Collider, passing directly underneath Lake Geneva. They would tunnel underneath Lake Geneva to complete this. So excuse me. I mean, the gist of what I get from CERN is, they're looking for the God particle, right? They've already admitted that they created a very, very small piece of antimatter that lasted for brief nanoseconds, and but what are they doing? And the expense of this thing has to be astronomical.
Well, I think that's why there's dates on it, because I worked in government at NASA, and we had dates and times and expectations, and we had a window. So you had an opportunity. We had small cyclotrons, what you just described, but they were on a smaller scale. And they had hours of operation where they were constantly free firing. Okay, let's fire this particle through, let's fire that particle through.
Yeah.
And then they had hours of discontinuation. Times where they were shut down until the next piece of funding came in to bring them back online. So
and it just makes me wonder, what are they going after? I mean, I love conspiracy theories, but I don't play into them. I don't talk about them on my show because you run the risk of if you have any form of personality, then people are going to at some point look at you and what you say, and they're going to adopt that as, hey, I like this guy and I'm going to believe what he believes. And that's not good, because if I'm not telling you something that's correct, now I'm fostering misinformation. And I don't want to do that. I want everybody to be open-minded, look at the things for yourself. I mean, the stuff that we're talking about, as far as M theory goes, we're talking about string theory, and we're talking about quantum mechanics and stuff like that. And
that's where I adopted the term from. I'm just kind of using it in a more paranormal sense because I couldn't come up with anything more clever.
Well, I think you're spot on when you come up with that. I think that's a very good thing to quantify this by. But that being said, when you look into how many experts there are, people in this world, not just in the US, not just in Switzerland, not just in the UK, how many legitimate experts there are in quantum mechanics and string theory, people who understand at the highest level this theory. It's in the low thousands. We have 8 billion people on this planet. And there are a couple of thousand people who understand what we're getting into, as far as, so, I mean, there's a lot of room for us as normal individuals or not so normal individuals to not understand exactly what we're talking about and the processes of that.
Right. My cousin blinds me all the time with this information. He's a theoretical physicist. He worked at CERN. So he gives me this information all the time whenever we talk, because I ask him about it. So how's it going over there? And I regret it every single time because I get lost, but because he keeps metaterming me left and right and center. But my time at NASA did teach me a little bit, and I never studied this stuff formally, but I did come to understand a lot. I'm nowhere near what my cousin understands, and like you said, there's maybe 1,000 people in the world who do. So just put that out there.
But that being said, I think it's a really good time for us to educate ourselves. I mean, I know especially in America, we have a big issue with education.
Okay.
But I mean, across the world, Eric is right. I mean, with 8 million people in the world, and you have people who live in the middle of absolutely nowhere, and then you have people who live in major metropoli and everything in between. So the education per person is kind of varied according to what they need to know in order to survive, right? Some people literally all they need to know is agriculture because that's their job, that's where they live, that'll get them through. Right. Versus the city dweller needs to know a whole other plethora of stuff. That being said, educate yourself on physics, educate yourself on mathematics. Physics is constantly changing. Obviously I had a much different childhood and background than most people, but I was being taught the principles of mathematics and physics when I was 5 and 6 years old. So I was raised with all of this science and with understanding this, having a passion for it, seeking it out on my own. I subscribe to several different scientific articles to get things straight from what's coming out. And I can tell you almost every single week, and for one point, it was almost every single day, they were saying this new discovery has completely upended the entire root of physics as we knew it. And so then everyone has to go back to the drawing board, figure out how that fits in, and then rework it from there. So it's not a perfect science, right? Like we thought we knew how everything worked and the relativity of gravity until all of a sudden we didn't. And things keep evolving and changing. And that's not a bad thing, but it can be when you're working with very old information and you're not understanding things as they're evolving. Just like with belief systems, if you're stuck in an ancient belief system and you're not going to budge, even though you've been shown plethora of evidence, you know, that belief system needs to shift, change, move, you know, be a little more open or variable, you're going to be stuck.
And let me jump back real quick. I can't remember if I said 8 million or 8 billion, but the world billion, the world population is 8 billion. It just went. I don't want people thinking that I think there's only 8 million people in the world, because that's not true.
That's how many McDonald's has served.
Over that.
In just one area.
But, you know, I think when we start talking about this stuff, and, you know, so many of these strange beings, these strange things that have occurred and appeared to people throughout history, and, you know, in the Quran, and they speak of them in the Bible and all this stuff. You know, when you start taking into consideration quantum mechanics and, you know, the concept of alternate realities, you know, often most associated with the idea of parallel universes. You know, in quantum mechanics, the existence of possible outcomes or states of quantum system until measured or observed. This gives rise to the concept of superposition, where a quantum particle or system can exist in a combination of different states simultaneously. The famous Schrodinger's cat thought experiment illustrates the idea best, where it says, where a cat is considered to be both dead and alive until it's observed.
Yes.
You know, and as
experiment, that thought experiment is
as funky as that sounds, you know, we don't know things exist until we see them. And not all of us see them. So then you run into, you got people who are saying you're crazy, you didn't see that. And you're saying, I did see it. And am I crazy because I saw it? Is it a trick of the mind or what? You know, but there's so much to this that I can't help but think that all these things are actually going on around us. You know, I've had quantifiable experience with a loved one who passed away.
Yeah.
And
you talked about
you know, we could talk about it for an entire day, and you could come at me from the standpoint of it's impossible, it was coincidental, it was just things, you were reading it into it, you were doing this, you were doing that. And that's fine. You could do it till you're blue in the face. But my heart, my gut, with what I experienced, I firmly know in my heart that I was having an interaction with a past loved one. So, you know, I can have this conversation with a number of people, and they're all going to be at different points of belief or disbelief at anywhere down the conversation.
Well, and also different points of understanding.
Right.
Right.
Well,
some people are going to think, okay, literally, he came back and called you on the phone. Other people are going to think, oh, okay, well, he worked through the tech. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's so many different layers of technology. And the one thing that drives me absolutely bananas, and you've touched on this, Eric, is when people get into this field and they lie and they make things up.
Oh, man.
Because
tell me about it.
For those of us who have had these real experiences that are real, we've done everything to make sure that there's not a physical reason for them that we can easily explain away. And we're reporting them. And then people look on us with doubt because people in the past have made stuff up or, you know, use technology to make things happen or make things look real, and it gets debunked later. that muddies the waters for everyone.
Yeah.
And I like to go into every experience assuming that the person is telling the truth, right? When I listen to different podcasts or I listen to different YouTube videos and I'm listening to people describe their experiences, or they've written into someone and they're recounting their experiences, or you're watching shows based on a real story, I want to believe them because that's where I come from. Why would they lie? And then when these little things come out, it gives people who already don't want to believe, and that's how I'm going to say it, they do not want to believe. So they're going to grasp on to any evidence that they possibly can that, well, one person lied, so everything's bunk.
Well, I agree with you there, JJ. I'm going to go back to what Eric said briefly about different people perceiving things differently. Same cousin who was a physicist has a sister, also my cousin, obviously, and JJ knows her, and she rather recently became aware. She started being able to, well, she basically became a medium, just the switch flipped on, and it was after her second child, I believe, and it was she is in the field of psychotherapy, and that was kind of shocking for her because she does come from a scientific background, and she didn't understand what was happening. And she knew I was in the paranormal field, and she came to me. She says, "Tim, you're going to think I'm nuts, but here's this, that, and the other thing." I said, "I don't think you're nuts at all." And she was relieved by that, but here's why I didn't think she was nuts. And my cousin, who's the physicist, challenged me on this. Tim, this thing with my sister, do you really believe that? I said, I don't have to believe it. I've seen such things for myself. Secondly, you're dealing with a very realistic, very real process. She is able to see things in a spectrum that you and I can't. And that is science. That's a measure of energy that she is able to receive in her eye, cones and rods and all that, that she is able to perceive. Something got altered in her to one degree or another, and she's able to perceive this other layer, similar to the way the jinn are able to perceive us. I didn't go that far into it, but you understand my point. Not everyone has basic 20/20 vision, myself included, and can see, the full spectrum of colors. Not everyone has the ability to see all colors. A lot of men are color blind, for crying out loud. I only found that out very recently. I'm not one of them. I'm very fortunate. I can differentiate between blue and black. That's the most common one. But there's also those of us like JJ and like myself to a degree, and even Eric to a degree, who can actually physically pierce that veil a little bit, or to a great deal like JJ can. And it is a physical thing that's happening in our eyes, in our brains, all that fun stuff. So this, for me, coming also from a scientific background, having worked at NASA, having been in the Air Force, all that fun stuff, there is, for me, a proven scientific reality that people have different variances of vision, hearing, and perception. That is the end of my speech. I'm sorry, I sucked up a lot of time there. Go ahead.
Well, I want to say, based on what you said, I think JJ's, you spoke about our abilities to see into this other stuff, and I think that's a fair assessment when you are talking about JJ. But I think the difference, obviously, there's a huge difference between her and I. I mean,
absolutely between her and I as well. Yeah.
On my end of things, I have not ever felt that I have the ability to see into this stuff. I come from the standpoint of, for some reason, I'm being allowed to see into this stuff. It's showing itself to me. Whereas she can at will go and look for it and find it. I think there's a big difference there. You know,
I'm sorry,
say,
Eric, let me
go,
step in real quick on that
yeah,
point. For JJ, if I'm not mistaken, JJ, it's not always at will for you. Even if you try something, you don't always get a reaction, do you?
It depends. To speak to what both of you are discussing, when we're young, we don't have any of these filters, which is why most children see these things, experience things. And then over time, with parents saying, no, you're not seeing that, that's not real, we build up these mental filters. And so when we become later teens and adults, when these things are occurring, our mind's already putting a filter that it's not happening. So we're ignoring it. I was not raised with that. So therefore, when these things are happening, they're happening technically to all of us that are in the room. I just might be the one who's sensing it because I'm not processing and filtering it out like others. Because I honestly, I mean, I've seen it too many times. Everyone has these abilities. I've seen people get goosebumps for no reason, and I'm staring at them and I see a spirit right next to them. And then they think, oh, I just got to chill. And I'm like, but they had a physical reaction to something. They might not have felt that there was a spirit there, but they had a physical reaction. I mean, look at the stuff that's been happening with me lately. I called out to something, and not only did it ring my doorbell and have my doorbell do something that it cannot physically do, saying hello, all creepy. But then just yesterday, my phone was on the counter and I'm making tea and it goes off on its own with a spirit box app. And I'm looking at it because nothing had touched it. And it's 3 things that you have to do in order to get into that app. So it's not easy. And of all apps to open, that one, right? And
Right.
then I say hello and it goes, hi, witch, nice to see you. And I'm
Yeah,
like, okay,
I was on the horn with you when that happened. We were
yeah.
texting between. That was amazing.
Yeah, and I sent you a screenshot and everything of showing
Yeah.
you like this is what occurred. But in that case, I had opened a door. I'm also, the past couple weeks, even before I called out to have an interdimensional being come and say hello, and it rang my doorbell, and opened my phone up. But even before that, I've been seeing, and it's been ramping up and up. And that's why I keep talking about the veil being down and people get ready, because if you're not even thinking in this magnitude, if this isn't even in your purview mentally, get prepared. This is why the news is talking about this stuff. This is why we're being flooded with movies and shows about these types of things. I was watching one the other day. It's a total kids show and guilty pleasure. I absolutely love it. Lock and Key on Netflix.
Oh, same.
And
I love that show.
I love it, right?
Guilty
So
pleasure, like you said.
I had started watching it because one of my brothers was like, hey, I was watching this with my kids. I think you're absolutely going to love it. And at first I totally did. And so I just finished the most recent season and they're opening up portals and
Yep.
they're showing other dimensions coming through. And I'm thinking, okay, I don't know how popular the show is, with the general public, but this kind of stuff is being out there. It's being popularized. It's being talked about a lot. Because if you think about it, it's getting us ready so that we can start accepting this stuff. So, the more you can start looking into physics, because of this stuff, you just think it shows or it's glamorized stories on podcasts, that's fine. But look into the actual physics of it. Look into the mathematics of it. It's there. It's all there. And, just like you, Tim, I have people who work in various different sectors of things who can actually talk intelligently about physics and engineering and electronics and technology and science. And I'm hearing the same things from them. And they're saying we're finally catching up to a lot of things that spirituality and lore has always talked about.
That's true. I want to go back to your television show thing very quickly. I don't know if you're aware of this, and the name of the group escapes me, but for decades, and I'm talking decades now, going back to at least the 40s when films and television was more available, more widely available, I should say. The Hollywood writers have been tasked by our government to come up with scenarios that could present themselves as threats against this country, if not the world. And from all angles, supernatural, alien invasion, say terrestrial invasion from enemy countries, if you want to call them that, or from other countries, we'll say. But for decades, these scenarios have been coming forward and being presented. And they went to the Hollywood guys because the analysts couldn't think that far outside the box. So they brought a few creatives together, and these are big names too. I won't go into it because I'll let the audience explore that for themselves, but I'll get you the proper title of the group to explore into the description. Suffice it to say, some of the scenarios that were prepared against and had a span of time that had elapsed were allowed to be made into movies. One such movie, one of my personal favorites, is Red Dawn. Isn't that amazing? Red Dawn was one of those scenario pictures.
Yeah.
And there's been several others since and before.
Well, I feel like I keep jumping back every time it comes to me to say something, but I'm going to do it.
Do it.
JJ said something about being in a room full of people and being the only one that saw what she saw. Nobody else was perceiving what she saw. And, for me, I love all the high strangeness, but Bigfoot for me is a lot of fun. And it's something that I've been very into for a long time. And one of the things that kind of comes to mind about that is you have a segment of people who have experiences with these things where they see them out in the wilds, in the woods, and they seem to be completely natural, completely physical, and they see them enter into view, they see them exit out of view. But then you have another group of people who experience these things, and they are seeing them do things that are pretty much mystifying the observer by turning and taking one or two steps and then just disappearing. You have other people who talk about this ability to cloak themselves in something that would be akin to the Predator movies. And as much as it seems bizarre and silly, and it seems like they could be made up, when you're talking about the quantum mechanics and the string theory and all that stuff, I think you have to take into consideration, like you were saying about your eyesight, we as humans, we only have a perceptible view of a certain amount of the light spectrum. We can only see certain colors. We can only see between here and here. We can't see what's over this, and we can't see what's beyond that. The same goes with our hearing. And, when it comes to vibrations, frequency, and light waves, there is so much that we are not capable of perceiving that, this comes to mind, and it continues to stick out to me. And I'm going to read it here. In string theory, the theory suggests that our universe may exist within a larger framework of multiple dimensions. These additional dimensions, beyond the three spatial dimensions, length, width, and height, and the dimensions of time that we are familiar with, are often referred to as extra dimensions. These extra dimensions are typically compactified or curled up in such tiny scales that they are not directly observable in our everyday experiences. However, they play a crucial role in the fundamental structure of the universe, influencing the behavior of particles and the forces they interact with. that's a lot of words there, but basically it's saying that string theory confirms additional dimensions that are not perceivable to us because of our narrowed view in both sight, hearing, and our spiritual awareness. Right. That these things are there, and they fundamentally make up everything that's around us. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that there are people who are more in tune with those frequencies or vibrations or any of those things that can peer into those other dimensions.
Well, JJ's living proof of that. She does have that wider, a wider both auditorially and visual spectrum available to her. In film terms, we call it the focal length, visually speaking. So she's got a little bit more into her focal length.
Well, and to that, I'm not alone. It's not like I'm the only one that can do this. Whether they're recessive genes, whether they're gifts that just haven't been opened up yet in different people, it's kind of like with different talents, right? If you don't work the muscle, all of a sudden, you use it or you lose it. And again, with conditioning children over time to, oh, that's pretend, oh, ignore that, that's your imagination, that's not true, that muscle gets lost. Whereas, being that I come from a family with, generations piled upon generations, where this stuff was talked about within the family, maybe not at the world at large because we couldn't, but those muscles didn't get weak. But I truly do believe that everyone has this capability. Some maybe more than others, and some will develop over time, but I mean, I've seen people who are quote unquote just mediums all of a sudden develop different skills and gifts later on because they're needed. And maybe some of that is extra dimensional help coming in and working with them and helping them. But, I am living proof to tell you, I've seen and understood and heard too much for this stuff not to be real. And I'm not insane. I'm very certifiably sane. So
certifiably sane.
yes.
Interesting way to put that.
I have it in writing. So I got a good brain. But that being said, it's all the science is there. It's just a matter of understanding it. And Eric, with the thing that you read, I understand that. That makes sense to me. I actually, in one of my, very early audios, I talk about the different type of physics, and they talk about each dimension and how it differs from the one before it. And, you'll hear people talk about this, 4D, 5D, and all that type of stuff. Well, it goes all the way up to 10. Now they're working on 11 finally. But when you understand that you're not just limited to this third dimension here, that our minds are able to open up. I mean, think of how much of our brain we don't even use, right? Why is it just sitting there and we're not using it? It has to be there for a reason. Why are there all storage? These...
I'm kidding.
Yeah, and why are there all these DNA sequences and genomes within us that we don't even know what they do?
Oh, you're talking about the part of us that are lizard, part of us that are possum, those little dead pieces of DNA that we literally have every creature on Earth inside of us, that type of thing.
Well, and even beyond that, there's parts of the DNA genome that they sequence that they can't understand what it's there for.
I understand. I'm sorry, I misunderstood what you said earlier. Okay, yeah, you're right.
And I often argue that we are not evolving. I argue that we are devolving from what we were. So if our brain capacity is so underutilized, and we're only using a very small part of our brain, and we're able to come up with this kind of technology, What if that's been a progressive downsizing of our abilities? What if the cultures that we're talking about, tens and 20s and 30,000 years ago, what if we were using a much larger part of our brain capacity?
Yeah.
What did our technology look like back then? Was it something mechanical like this? Probably not. It was something more in lines with the type of stuff that we've been talking about, and in more of a metaphysical realm, I would think.
Do you think it's orchestrated? Do you think the powers that be they who they are, here on Earth, are afraid of us advancing?
That's a really good question. And my initial answer to that would be, I don't think that it was orchestrated from the beginning, but I think once it was recognized, then the powers that be decided to jump on board and continue that process, and encourage the downward spiral, if you will. I'll go as far as to say this. I spent several years working a part-time job in IT at a local high school, and my children went to that school. They did very well, but when they got to college, it was extremely apparent that they were nowhere near being prepared for the collegiate experience, as far as academia. And I had a chance once to speak with one of the best teachers at that high school that they had attended. He and I had a conversation in the hallway, where he asked how the kids were doing in school, and I said, they're doing good. I mean, it's a learning curve. And I said, I do have to say that it's pretty disappointing to have them at the point that they're at now and realize that their high school career was found to be lacking considerably. And I was surprised, because I thought he was going to kind of cop an attitude with me and jump on, this boisterous, teachers are great and all this. Instead, what he said was, I have no doubt. He's like, if you had any idea how far down I've had to dumb down my curriculum over the past 10 years, you would not believe. So,
can I ask you what year this was roughly?
When we had the conversation, that would have been 2017, 2018, maybe. Because my kids graduated in 2015 and 2016.
Okay, gotcha.
So, they would have been in their first and second year of college, respectively. But he said that he literally was forced by the administration to dumb down his teachings.
I taught at the high school level briefly for like 3 years, I think. And then at the college level after that, I was part of the AVID educational system, which took middling students and made them A students. And I was successful in that. I took all my kids to A's, which I was very proud of. But you're absolutely right. In fact, I can pinpoint almost to the day when when the lesser educated kind of won an argument. And it happened at the school I was teaching at. There was a news segment that came on, and I was aware of some sort of brouhaha in the background. There was some chatter about it loosely in the teacher's lounge, but then I saw the news article and I understood a little bit better about what I'd heard peripherally. And the argument was from the student, they didn't teach us this now. And then I go to take my SATs and I failed because they didn't teach it to me. Now, the argument was they didn't teach it to her. The truth of the matter was she cut classes left, right, and center. The argument was further made that the teacher didn't single her out as a student in need and pry her with all this information. Okay. Teaching can only go so far, especially if you have 30 students per class, and every class period, there's another 30 students. Okay, that's a lot of responsibility by itself. And so this student won their argument with the school board because there was a lawsuit threatened. They said, no lawsuit, we'll abide. And they give her a passing grade and all that fun stuff. And I think that was the moment, at least in my district, in my neck of the woods out here in the I'm not in Southern California, I'm in Northern California. And it was that permeated. Other students having similar situations made a lot of noise. And that's when the dummy down started happening, is from my recollection, from my point of view. Granted, but that's when it happened. As far as
I think there needs to be a distinction made here. As far as my kids were concerned in the school that we're talking about, my kids, fortunately, were both very good students, and they ended up both having the same teacher a year apart for math. And I don't remember what the curriculum was exactly, but you spend your life with your kids. You're watching their grades as they're going through all of elementary school and they get into high school, and then you're faced with a situation where your kid's not doing well in a class. And so if that was something that I was used to seeing, that my kid struggled in school, it would make sense that once he got to a harder class, he may be failing or she may be failing and needing some help. But that wasn't the case. Both of my kids got through school relatively easy. And when, this teacher in particular, I knew him through coaching, and I felt at ease with going and talking to him. And I told him, I said, listen, you've got my kid in your class, and he's coming home and he's telling me that he doesn't understand what you're teaching. And when he comes up to ask you a question, your response to him is, go back to your seat and pay better attention. That's laziness. That's not being a good teacher.
I agree wholeheartedly.
Now, I had that experience with both of my kids, both with the same teacher. And the second time around, I said, do you remember when we had this conversation last year? And you're doing the same damn thing.
Yeah, I agree. There are bad teachers out there.
And that made a huge difference, because then he knew he couldn't get away with the lazy shit with me. And when my kids did ask a question, it was because they truly didn't understand and needed a little bit of extra teaching.
Right.
But what I was talking about with the teacher that was in the hallway that I had the conversation with, that was a different situation. That was an intentional dumbing down of the curriculum for whatever reason. Is it just because kids are dumber these days and we gotta dumb everything down because they can't understand it? No, I don't believe that. I think it all plays into, you get a certain amount of money for every kid that's in school and for the number of days that they actually show up. If there's all kinds of counts. When I was working there, it seemed like every couple of weeks there was some kind of a count. You had to make sure that enough kids were here, and you had to make sure that classes were full, and there couldn't be so many absences and all this stuff, because it was all generating money from the state to continue the school going on. But that's one aspect of it. But there's been an intentional dumbing down of our education system, and that's the point that I recognized it. I'm sure that it goes far beyond that. It's probably been happening for generations
I was
to some
when
extent.
when my experience happened, it was 2004, I believe. So
Yeah, and to be honest, you're both right. You're not wrong, but some of the reasons behind it are you have parents who no longer take any responsibility or accountability for their child's actions. There's no, your kids being a little, you know what, in class, you need to discipline them, you know, we're sending them home, whatever. There's kids who their parents do absolutely nothing at home whatsoever to make sure they're doing homework or understanding their curriculum. They have no home base, no normal space or environment to even, you know, learn or further with any of the stuff that they're learning. So it goes in one ear out the other. And then you have everything in between. And then you pile on technology with everything, where we have instant access to so much information that no one's retaining it. Because all you have to do is, you know, ask whatever device you have. And that in and of itself, I mean, God, I remember as a kid, we had to do all these memorization tables and all these different things. I mean, over here in America, we're struggling with getting kids to even learn how to read. In China, they're literally teaching top elementary school kids about quantum physics and quantum mechanics. So, is there an intentional dumbing down? Yes. Does it have to do with just our current time period? No, I disagree. I actually think the intentional dumbing down went way back to during the Nicene Conference, when they started breaking things up and deciding what, you know, Gnostic books were getting thrown out, what was going to become the Torah and the Bible, and the witch trials and the Inquisition, and ramming religion down everyone's throat and saying you either convert or die. Well, you know, which one are you going to choose, right? So a lot of things were lost. A lot of understanding of old cultures, civilizations were lost during that. You know, you got to remember they had book burnings as well. And, you know, again, current day books are not the problem, people, okay? The issues are the ideologies and, like I was saying earlier, getting stuck in these belief systems. And even though you have so much proof thrown at you that it's false or it needs to be modified in some way, shape, or form, people dig their heels in further to stick to this ridiculousness of old that's based on either a falsity or a half truth or half understanding. I don't want to say everything has bad connotation or reason behind it, but if you are going around like you started out, Eric, with when you were talking, was saying why you don't discuss conspiracy theories often on your show, because you don't want to say something is something and then have someone really like you and follow you, and then they start believing in it, and then you find out it's false later, but that person never does.
right.
And then they're living their life under a false pretense. That would be a half truth, right? Or a possible untruth. And it just never gets back to that person and rectified. But they go off and they tell everyone that, and then they start a cult, and then everyone drinks the Kool-Aid, and here we are with an issue with people trying to burn ice, not understanding, you know, why a Bic lighter isn't melting a snowball. I mean, it's 2023, and there's certain things that I don't know. I know we went completely off topic,
A
Tim.
little bit,
So
but it's
sorry,
okay.
but
we did, but at the same point, I think it's kind of important because, you know, like what you said about, you know, parents being too busy to take time and stay vested in their kids and pay attention. A lot of that has to do with, you know, divorce rates being so high.
Agreed.
A lot of families are one parent households, and you know, going back to what you said, Tim, you asked, do you think that this has been an intentional dumbing down by the elites? Right.
Yes.
So in the aspect of answering a partial yes to that question, countries with the highest divorce rates include the United States, Russia, and Europe. That's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people. Yeah.
That's a lot of people.
That's two continents.
That's a lot of people. And what has prompted those divorce rates? Is it social media? Is it the economic conditions that we've been faced with because of our government's decisions?
It's not any one thing, but yeah, keep going.
The changing of societal norms. We've been experiencing a ton of stuff that's kind of rocking our worlds in from our age group. I'm probably the oldest of the three of us, but we're all, I would consider, midlife. The difference is that with what we grew up with versus what the kids nowadays are growing up with are considerably different. And, I don't know. Is it an intentional thing?
The question I put forward was, is an intentional dumbing down because we're advancing or we're advancing versus regressing like we are? Well,
I don't know that it's necessarily an intentional dumbing down because we were more so to keep us from getting to the point where we were advancing, stalemating that opportunity for us to advance.
Gotcha.
I don't know.
It's that's why I posed the question. I don't know either. I have a couple of ideas about it, but like you said, conspiracies is very, very small part of my program. So we'll stop. Let's get back to the main point briefly. Points of connection and theory in the paranormal. This is more of a physical thing, but I want to briefly talk about Sergeant Stephen Digna from Fort Irwin. He was recently featured on Dr. Greer's latest podcast or YouTube thing.
Disclosure.
Thank you. Disclosure. And he was the sergeant, former Army sergeant who he was a range master. He had some brain damage.
Yeah.
He admitted to that on mic. And he told the story of how he encountered a time kite, which is the small black thing that had the weird texture to it, almost like a cat's tongue. This is virtually identical to what yet another sergeant, interestingly, Jim Pattinson experienced at the U.S. base at Rendlesham, near Rendlesham Forest. And we all know that story. Same craft, writing on the outside, funny texture to the skin. His story differs in that he was taken into the craft. And inside the craft, even though it was really small on the outside, had kind of like a TARDIS effect. It was larger on the inside. These lights were before him, these balls, these orbs. He said they looked tangible and they spoke to him telepathically. And it's one of the few stories in the UFO thing that actually gives me hope for our future as humans. And it was, I call it the time kite. Well, actually, I don't know if that's my phrase or not, but anyway, these little balls told the sergeant, don't be afraid. We all know that. They always say that. We're from the future and we're just ensuring that things go as they're supposed to. It'll all be okay. That was the end of the message. I'm kind of paraphrasing, but it was, of all the stories that do have similarities, and it's not the first time we've seen the time kite, this black little thing flying through the air, diamond shaped thing. It was the one time, though, we had a message it was pretty positive, not only positive, but a positive about our future, that it's going to be okay. So I just wanted to know if you've run across any other stories that have had a similar message.
Yeah, actually, the craft description was different. It was not what you're referring to as the time kite, but in the 90s in rural Zimbabwe, the aerial school that that experience encapsulated just over 100 people, all kids, administrators, school teachers, nearly 100 people experienced that that landing of a craft and the subsequent exiting of entities that were very much what we're used to hearing as far as the description of being, grays, 3.5, 4.5 foot tall, larger heads, big almond eyes, very black in color. And what's really impressive about this show is about that that experience was not only were those children filmed back right after it happened, and there is some documentary footage of the interviews with those kids, but then again, more recently in the past 3 or 4 years, documentarian James Fox, who has shows called The Phenomenon, and he recently did one about the Brazil experience, where the two entities were basically found, taken to the hospital, and then one of the guys died from exposure to it. All of those kids who had experience with those entities said that they received images in their head, and they were told that they were basically to be the stewards of the earth, and that they could save us from keeping, if we continue to go down the route that we're going, that it was going to be bad, but we could stop it and we could change. So the communication and the message that was being given to those kids is extremely similar to what you're talking about. Different craft, does that mean it's a different set of beings? Not necessarily. If you pay attention to Bob Lazar when he worked at S4 out there as a part of Area 51,
right,
he said he observed 9 different craft that were all considerably different in appearance. Are they just different models? Like we have coming out of Detroit. Are they just different models of vehicles and all coming from the same place, or are they all different? Different civilizations all coming to us for the same reason. Why is that? What are we doing that would garner that much attention from multiple species? What are we doing that would
it begs, yeah. It also begs the larger question: why do they care? Are we important to them at a later stage, maybe?
Well, perhaps if they're living right next to us in another dimension,
Well,
they care because they're
Yeah.
sharing the same planet with us, and they would like us to stop doing what we're doing. Eric, back to being good stewards, which was the message given to those children. It actually states that in the Bible. And that's the one part of especially this Christian nationalism movement that's been happening. That's actually really, really revolting to me. This whole kind of merging of capitalism and Christianity into this very ugly little thing.
Hold on. I'm not aware of this at all. I must be
Oh,
living under a rock.
well, you are. Love you dearly, honey, but
Wow.
Yeah, there's this very ugly capitalism / Christian nationalism that has been happening, honestly, since it's been going on since probably the 1800s, with just using people for slave labor and paying them next to nothing. But over time, it's gotten worse and worse, so that average people who are making minimum wage are thinking, well, oh, this global warming, this is just, I don't have a word that I can use. Poppycock.
Poppycock. Yes.
And
that'll work too.
thank you, Eric. But basically discounting just taking care of our environment. I mean, hi, we all live here. Breathing clean air is important, not only just if you're asthmatic or if you have allergies, but for the future of our humanity's survival.
Mm.
Making sure that we're not going to have entire states be underwater also is important, right? Like making sure that people have safe water to drink is important. So these are the things that need to be, that are part of being, but all of these things go into being good stewards of the earth, right? And so it really bothers me when I hear this being talked about in churches or by ministers or pastors to their congregations of like, oh, you don't need to care about any of that. I'm sorry. I care about how I'm breathing, my children, my children's children, like that needs to stop. This whole let's work everybody to the bone in order to make an extra buck off of them. That's another reason why we have kids who aren't learning as well also, is because consumerism alone. And again, these are all distractions. If you really want to go back to when I think it happened, it was when religion was created instead of spirituality, and it divorced that personal relationship between us and God. And when that was severed, because you had to go through a
middleman
in order to converse with God or pay to pray, that was actually a thing a lot of people don't realize.
Well, yeah. Sam and I talked about that briefly.
Yes, yeah.
That's one of the things Jesus railed against, and same also Muhammad.
Oh yeah, yeah.
railed
He
against
actually went into the table and went into the temple and flipped over tables about it.
Yep.
So, when that connection was severed and you had to go through a middle human man and pay to have some connection with the divine, that's when things got cut off. And then people wonder all these years later, why are we miserable? Why this? Why that? Well, I wonder why, because you're not able to see the divine essence within yourself and your connection with the divine. And then we wonder, oh, why are we, why is she able to see X, Y, and Z and we're not? Well, first of all, you just have to have a connection. It's like good internet. Think of it that way. If I have to put it into normal terms, right? Okay. You can't go online unless you have good internet.
Yeah. You gotta have all those bars, kids.
Yes.
I love that analogy. I'm sorry, go ahead.
You talk about paying to pray. And just quickly, I mean, when I went to get married, I naturally went to the Catholic church that I grew up in. And everything was hunky-dory. And when it came time to come back and have a meeting with the priest about that, we were met by the little old lady with the very loud clip-cloppy shoes that walked down this echoing chamber as she came to us. And she was about 4'2", and she looked up at us and she said, I'm very sorry, but Father so-and-so, whatever his name was, I don't remember, had looked back and found no donations from you or your family in the recent past, and he doesn't think it'd be in the best interest of the church to conduct the ceremony for you. And then she turned around and she clip-clopped back down the long hallway, and we just stood there and looked at each other, and it's like, what does our decision to become man and wife in front of God have to do with having made donations to the church?
I'll tell zero.
So,
it doesn't.
I mean, when they pass the hat around or the tray or whatever, that's anonymous. I mean,
yeah,
come on.
Yeah, but they want tithing and larger donations.
Yeah,
I've run into this, and Tim, I know you have as well, when
Mm-hmm.
we're working paranormal cases, where the person feels better with going with a member of clergy. And
Oh yeah.
so several times when I've had people who have had things and they'd rather have someone physically there and they're far from me, I've told them, hey, you might want to reach out to a member of your local church or clergy, but I always warn them, you need to get in advance whatever price it is for them to come out, because I personally have run into 4 different times where they've called clergy and twice clergy came out and then basically said, we're not leaving until you pay us whatever, and it was an exorbitant amount for what they supposedly done. So that's a little bit like blackmail. 2 other times they were told, until we have a check for this amount in hand, no one's coming out.
Wow.
And these are churches, and these are different churches, not just in particular the Catholic Church. That being said, yes, the Catholic Church does have some wonderful outreach programs that it's done, orphanages and things that it's done over the years, but there is a lot of money there. And it's really, really sad to me that they tend to go into some of the poorest communities, just like the days of old, and basically bleed them dry in order to give this salvation.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a time, I think it was during the Medici reign, where you could buy forgiveness from the Pope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and then you had Halloween, which, All Hallows Eve, that's where we came from, trick-or-treating came from, is people for Day of the Dead, these orphan children would go around and ask for these little cakes, and people would give them cakes to go over to their deceased loved ones' graves and pray for them.
Yeah.
And that was a normalized thing. Like, hey, I don't want to go over and pray at the grave, so can you go over and do it for me? I'll pay you in a rice cake. Are you kidding me?
Wow.
And this is why I love some of the Gnostic Gospels and when the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, and in particular that movie Stigmata, when it talks about Jesus said, my church is where 2 or more are gathered. And it could be under a rock on top of the mountain. It does not need to be in a building.
Yeah. I mean, I think recently, Josh, what's his name from Unexplained or
Gates.
Unexplored?
Josh Gates.
Josh Gates, thank you. Horrible names and places and people and faces. But I digress. Josh Gates is most recent this season, I think his first or second episode. There's that passage in the Bible that says, upon this rock I will build my church. And it wasn't the Vatican. This one scholar thinks, he says, no, it's this cave. There's this rock there. And there used to be a statue of Pan, but they knocked it down. And this was the rock. This is the rock on which they would build their church. And it was in the cave, just in a grotto. It was amazing. It's like, wow, that's pretty cool.
I'm going to say something, and this is going to be very controversial, but
God, here we go.
Here we go. Get ready, kids.
It's been bubbling up inside me for a minute. So
speaking of bubbling, I'm boiling over here. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay. So when I talk about way back when they started religion and they took away your personal ability to pray, commune with spirit, and they started severing that, and then it was convert or die, right?
Mm-hmm.
When that started, that's when you had secret societies start. The Masons, Knights Templar, keep on Rosicrucians. You can keep naming them one after the other.
And she's spanning thousands of years here.
I am.
They didn't all
Yes,
happen
I
at
am.
the same time.
No, not at all. But, one led to another, led to another.
Right.
And the reasons why these needed to happen is because people don't realize, they think, oh, they're secret, they're doing something, nefarious. No, they were trying to keep the true spirituality alive, but they had to do it under these secret pretenses, because if you were caught praying at home without paying in a church, you died. Or they cut off one of your arms, or they took your land, or they took your home. People don't realize there was all this violence around this, that people literally, it was convert or die. There was no in between. So secret societies that get these really bad raps now, and I just don't understand why. When you really deep dive into what it is that they're talking about going within and connecting with the divine and understanding all these levels of our being. And it's absolutely beautiful. I mean, Tim, you and I have met several times at the Rosicrucian Museum near us.
Oh, yeah.
And actually, when you were writing your book, we went and sat right there at in front of the temple and I had a little conversation about it. And it's absolutely wonderful. And that all ties into alchemy and it ties into all of these larger concepts. And the fact that they're demonized today chaps my hide, okay? For lack of a better term, simply for the mere reason that it's that small-minded thinking. Oh, it's secret, so there's something nefarious. No, it's secret because not everyone should have that information back then because A, it was convert or die and, being killed off by the church, but also to preserve it for future people who were ready for that growth. Just like what we're all talking about today. Why are some people opening up spiritually and having these awakenings and starting to see things and commune with things and understanding physics at a different level when it's never something they've been interested in before and things are starting to make sense for them? Whereas other people are taking us back to caveman times. Thank you for letting me get that off my chest.
Today's pulpit on why religion isn't the greatest thing in the world is brought to you by JJROSE777
and red.
One more thing. I got one.
I'm
more
sorry,
thing.
we're out of time. No, go ahead. I'm teasing.
So JJ was talking about climate change and the possibility with the raising of the sea levels and losing portions of several states around the U.S. because of that. What happens to the people that live there? They become displaced. They have to move inward more towards the center of the United States, correct? And what have they been talking about now for the past five or so years? They keep talking about these 15-minute cities, right? Yeah. Where everything can be reached within 15 minutes, whether it's walking or biking. And it's become a popular idea. So if you consider the fact that they're already talking about these cities that are going to be much smaller communities, and you're looking at a number of people that are going to have to egress the coastal areas and move in closer. If they do decide to go with these 15-minute cities or whatever they want to call them, you're going to have an increased population. And what happens when you start piling people on top of people in small communities and small cities? You start increased violence, increased crime rates. We've already known that's been proven and talked about for years that certain 3-letter agencies have introduced drugs into specific low-income housing areas to specifically get that spread out throughout the community and give people a way to make money and keep them trapped in these little portions of hell.
Yes, there are all these stack communities are starting to come up. Did you see the one? There's a TV show out called Silo. Someone's actually building it, I think, in Denver.
Yeah, I saw the I don't remember what streaming service it's on, but it's on my list of things to start watching. I'll probably wait until it starts cooling off and gets not so nice out. But yeah, that looks very interesting. And I'm not saying that this is what's happening, but if it is what's happening,
I mean, there's an actual project, Silo project. They call it Silo, and it's underground. It's in Denver, and it's a circular community basically, and it goes down for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of feet, and it's frightening. In my personal estimation. You might have me as a neighbor sooner than you might expect. That's all. Fair warning.
But yeah, that's it for me. I mean, there's just so much weird in this world that's going on, and when you start looking at it with an open mind And yeah, I just think that you can't help but draw correlations to other weird things that are going on, and early on you started with talking about people who go out in the woods and are looking for Bigfoot and they hear the knock, right? And then you have people who go investigating haunted houses and you hear knocks. And a while ago you were talking about this gentleman going into the TARDIS like environment inside that time kite and had these balls of light. There are balls of light related to multiple Bigfoot experiences.
Oh yeah.
I went to a graveyard and did an investigation. The first time I ever went looking for anything with my kids on a kind of on a whim for a paranormal investigation, and I had one manifest in front of me. My daughter and I both my daughter and I both saw it. It was a bluish white light that came out of nowhere and zipped around for a brief second and then disappeared. There's reports of these lights in every aspect of things that we're looking at, considering to be under the umbrella of high strangeness and the paranormal. Well, I think the paranormal is just stuff we don't understand yet.
So you can go back to the adage that magic is science we don't understand, and the same thing could be true for these other phenomena.
Yeah, I think we've ranted about everything possible.
And we did go off the rails a little bit tonight.
I think we took this as far off the rails as we possibly could for you.
We definitely took the long road to.
Thanks to Eric for bringing it back around.
Yeah,
on topic. That's fantastic. Well, Eric, JJ, thank you so much for being on the air with me on this rather fascinating topic. You took us down a great road. I'm sure everyone will enjoy it. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for watching and listening, and we'll see you next time on Paranormal Insight. Welcome back. I'm glad you stuck around for the end. An interesting topic, to say the least. Did we tackle everything we aimed to on this particular program? No. In fact, we went well and truly off course. Well, once or twice. Kind of par for the course with this group. And by group, I mean myself, JJROSE, and Eric. We're all part of a larger collective of 5 such podcasters. We jokingly call ourselves the Fantastic Five. And we even have a a podcast that I'll put up later from 2023 that we, or was it 24? I can't recall. But we attempted to do all 5 of us together. You'll get to see what that is. But it usually decays into some of the most interesting chaos in the world, no matter what the main topic is supposed to be. We still cover a lot of great, interesting topics in the paranormal world. But getting back to this, just as a footnote to that final bit to that thought, that's why we go off topic. We just know each other so well. We're good friends. And anyway, going on to the main topic, which was hard for us. And I laugh because it's true. We had occasion to still touch on the interesting things having to do with paranormal M theory. And I think Eric, for the most part, brought it together at the very end of the show when he started talking about, as we discussed at the very beginning, knocks in a haunted house meets knocks with Bigfoot. Now, I can make that differentiation for you right now. Bigfoot, we theorize, is making these tree knocks. Certain shaky pieces of video have surfaced that seem to indicate that is the case. They take smaller branches, whack them against trees, and get a pretty impressive, resounding result, whereas we have to use axe handles to generate that, that pop. Still, versus knocks in a haunted location, for example, that has connotations of a human and more humanoid or human interaction from an entity that is passed on, presumably a human entity. Most times, more often than not. One could argue that, oh, it could be poltergeists making these noises, or it could be any number of other phantom or shadow person or what have you making that knocking sound. So I think he was just trying to make an argument that not everything does connect in that particular instance. However, he did make another point immediately after that regarding glowing orbs. I told my story about the time kite. I think that's my term too. I'm coining things left and right on this episode. I wasn't even intending to, but having orbs in haunted locations or orbs in around Bigfoot encounters and orbs certainly around UFO encounters as well. Are they the same exact thing? The world may never know, but in my personal estimation, no. I find it interesting that they use all three of those circumstances that I listed have that phenomena in common. Are the exact same thing? Probably not. With UFOs, I would assume it's some sort of advanced mechanical thing, advanced mechanism of some sort. With Bigfoot, I can only guess. Perhaps something similar. There has been a Bigfoot UFO connection in the past. So maybe it could be mechanical for them as well. Those of them that use it. We have seen arguments where some say there are two kinds of Bigfoot, very much like there are two types of humans. In that, there's the terrestrial humans and the sky humans. Some call them the Nordics. They look most like us, typically blonde, very tall, very muscular too. And then for the Bigfoot, there's the terrestrial Bigfoot and there's the UFO-based Bigfoot. So drawing those parallels, they're going to be loose. They're going to be, yeah, you're not going to be able to draw a straight line necessarily all the time. But there is still something phenomenally familiar about some of our more ancient mythical creatures, about our more ancient gods. We never got into that in the show. We took a weird left turn into religion at one point, but que sera. I think overall the M theory still has to be explored further and perhaps a little bit more not succinctly, but more in depth and on target. With any luck, we'll be able to do that with our guests in the future here on the show. Be they returning guests or new guests. But in any event, it's interesting to note that these parallels still do exist and that these parallels remain, I guess, for lack of a better term, pronounced, maybe even obvious. It's kind of up to you to decide and up to me to dig a little deeper. So with that, I bid you a fantastic, wonderful good night. And we'll see you next time on Paranormal Insight. Have a good rest of the week. Until next time. If you have a paranormal experience that you would like to discuss on the show, please email us at paranormal.insight.podcast@gmail.com. That's paranormal.insight.podcast@gmail.com.